Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Zmuda. I am joined by my
Bena Kallick.
co-conspirator over here, Bena Kallick, and my co-conspirator all the way across the country, Art Costa. Say hello.
I'm here.
And we are so thrilled to come to you live tonight. We are going to be talking about a habit that is something that is near and dear to our collective hearts, remaining open to continuous learning. So before we dive into that conversation, we just want to make a grand announcement in case you haven't started to circle onto our website yet. We are announcing our next conference, which will be on April 7th and 8th, 2025, hosted in Greece, New York. So we're moving from California back to the East Coast. And it's an opportunity to explore not just remaining open to continuous learning, but all of the habits with our growing community of learners and schools and participants that really continue to be energized by the experience. So if you're interested, go ahead and reach out into the comments. I know that Chrissy behind the scenes has posted that. So if you want to do a quick link there, or you can actually just add a comment in the chat and we will figure out like what platform you're on and continue to get information that way to you. So without further ado, let's start diving into remaining open to continuous learning. So Art, when we start thinking about the idea of what does it mean to be a continuous learner, let's start embracing that part of the habit first. So what does that mean to be a continuous learner?
Well, first of all, to be a human being, you have to be a continuous learner. The two go hand in hand. We never stop learning. Human beings are made to be continuous learners. The only time they stop is when they die. And so we are continuously learning, experiencing, experimenting, and learning from our mistakes as well as our successes, learning from other people, learning from books, learning from TV, so many, many, many different ways. Probably the biggest problem that we have with continuous learning is getting stalled, thinking that you're an expert. If you say, oh, I already know everything about that, or that's old hat to me, you're not a continuous learner. But rather you have to be open to the fact that you can continue to learn. My friend Bill Summers, our friend Bill Summers, have a quote. He says, not learning is bad, but not wanting to learn is even worse. And so we as humans are not only built to continue learning, but also with the desire to learning more and more and more. And so we go throughout our lifetimes continuing to learn. And the only time you stop really is when you're 6 feet under. So there are sometimes blockades to learning. And one of them is to think that you are already knowledgeable, that you have certainty. And that is something that we want to avoid, rather to be open. Even though you know a lot about something, you want to learn more, and you want to add to that knowledge, to refine it, to link it to other knowledge, to listen to other people, so that so humans are in a constant state of learning growth.
So one thing behind the scenes that you should know about Art, Bena, and myself is that we continue to interact with one another on a regular basis. So one of the articles that Art sent to Bena and myself, it was a Harvard Business Review article, Don't Be Blinded by Your Own Expertise. And again, you should see that down below in the comments. But the opportunity of continuing to start to embody what does it mean to be a continuous learner? And hopefully, as we're continuing this conversation today, you'll see the interaction amongst the three of us to actually start to clarify not just a rich article that continue to provoke and engage our thinking, but also starting to consider in what ways are we actually learning from one another based on age, based on gender, based on geography, but also based on common interests, based on relationships. So, Bena, can you talk a little bit about continuous learner amongst like a group identity? So whether it's a group of the three of us or another network that you're connected with.
Well, it really is interesting because, Art, I think when you were talking about the dangers of expertise, one of the things that started to run into my mind as I was thinking about that was the idea that it's not just the idea of certainty, although I certainly think that ambiguity leaves us with a search, a quest. We want to know more. And I think there's, I love what Stephen Colbert always calls a certain amount of truthiness, which is that, we're all in a quest for truth, but it's not like all facts are worthy, that all facts are truth, that there is this whole understanding of what do we mean and what are we searching for? But I think that what we know definitely is that the search has to be worthy, that we have to understand that we don't know just by our first brush with something, that the information really is it truly information? And we are certainly challenged with that right now. What constitutes credible information? How do we know its credibility? So we keep diving deeper and deeper, and we keep looking for that simple answer to something because we're with such impatience. But in fact, what we really need to do is to find a safe place where we can offer our expertise. And in offering our expertise, we can actually begin to shape it, to think about it, to give it more meaning. So I guess I keep asking the question, not only what we do with what we know, but how we keep asking ourselves, are we making sense out of it? And what constitutes our checks on that sense making?
So it's interesting because
Right.
the idea of expertise is almost a double-edged sword. So the notion is that expertise can actually become all-consuming. It can actually become a trap that blinds you, makes you closed off to continuous learning. But the way you started to describe expertise, Bena, is the opportunity to engage in a trusted conversation where you're not only sharing your expertise, but you're also stepping back and starting to lend your mind to being open to like some kind of interaction, conversation, collection of data that actually can continue to inform your thinking. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Art, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I think a lot of this has to do with ego. Somehow in our culture, we have taught kids, or we think that it's a good trait that we know a lot, that we are expertise, and I would suggest that what strengthens an ego is that you are a better learner, but not so much that you know a lot about something. In other words, it's the learning process that should feed an ego rather than the knowledge base. Being an expert closes yourself down because your ego gets in the way. I think I know a lot about that, therefore I don't want to learn.
Yeah.
But rather, if we say, I'm always interested in expanding my knowledge, I'm interested in learning more about this, I'm interested in the new results that I may have missed along the way. And so there's a being open. There is a tendency that we have in our society, I think, to be afraid of making mistakes. And that hinders us. It hinders kids, of course. And I suggest that we celebrate mistakes. In fact, it'd be fun to have a mistake meeting every once in a while, and we can laugh at each other's mistakes. But what we're really exuding is the fact that we are learning, that it's okay to make mistakes, but that we learn from them. And so being a continuous learner throughout our whole lifetime is part of being human, and is part of being a continuous learner, of course.
Well, I mean, I think the other interesting dynamic is that it's the kind of problems, issues, and challenges that you're surrounding yourself with. So the opportunity is, from a learning perspective, the capacity to be a patient problem solver. I'm remembering Dan Meyer said that in 2010 when he did that beautiful TED Talk math video. The opportunity of having a problem or a challenge or an issue that's worthy enough to actually not rush to immediate judgment or like a foregone conclusion and then turning the page for the next topic, challenge, or issue. So I think that's an interesting dynamic, because when we're patient, what are the capacities that are actually more likely to show up as we're keeping ourselves open to that kind of learning?
Certainly one of the things that I keep thinking about is there's a level of humility. And, Art and I at one time even thought about, is this the 17th habit, humility? The humility of not knowing.
Yeah.
And it's really this idea that you're willing to have that kind of disposition that says, it's okay that I don't know. It's okay that I'm not perfect. In fact, it's unlikely that anybody I know is perfect. So how do I really make sure that I feel comfortable with the idea that not knowing is okay? On the other hand, we wouldn't want to make a marvelous attribute out of not knowing. What we want to make a marvelous attribute about is your willingness and your openness to continue to dive a little deeper. But diving deeper is not like an abysmal, endless, infinite search.
Right.
But it does suggest that we have a better sense of what it takes to really build and develop expertise. And I think that's something also. We tend to reward and recognize and extol something that is not really expertise at the highest level of expertise. So how do we begin to build a kind of continuum of that, where we don't say this is the absolute, but this is the quest? And there are so many things we are on a quest of knowing right now. I mean, I was just listening to a wonderful TED Talk on AI. Is it something that's so dangerous that we have to really be aware of it? Is it really something terribly scary?
Yeah.
Or is it something that's really going to contribute to our knowing, contribute to the things that we need to know to be able to survive? And there is no answer to that. That's what I would call a very issue-centered kind of approach that allows us to have the depth of exploration and come to small conclusions along the way as we kind of inform ourselves. And that to me is about the remaining, not just about the open, it's about the remaining.
That's right.
I think it's important too for teachers, particularly, and parents, to demonstrate to their students and children that they are continuous learners as well. Teachers have a wonderful opportunity to describe what goes on in a school system, and that I go to staff development, I'm reading books, we're having meetings, I learn from my peers, so they can demonstrate to the students that they're in a form of continuous learning as a teacher, and letting kids in on the fact that they're working on an advanced degree, for example, that they're having a meeting about artificial intelligence, for example, and that the teachers are continuous learners among students who are indeed continuous learners. So let teachers let their kids know that they are in that role as a teacher, not because they know a lot, but because they're learning a lot.
So as we start to move into the idea of an external view, making sense of the world, let's turn and make it internal now. So one thing that I was actually really interested in when I was starting to think about remaining open to continuous learning is the connection it has to so that kind of intrapersonal introspection in relation to remaining open. So one thing that I did, and there's going to be a link to the blog post, something that I wrote about a month ago, is really thinking about the story we tell ourselves. It's the narrative or the through line. And sometimes we have some kind of narrative loop that actually keeps us a little bit stuck, meaning that it means that you're unfortunately an expert in your own life, meaning that you've seen this story before. You actually know the patterns that you might react to. And it starts to feel, even though you feel perhaps expert in what potentially might be a foregone conclusion, all of a sudden it also feels stale. And so the interesting dynamic from an introspection point of view, I'd love to hear Art and Bena talk about that. And the opportunity of remaining open to continuous learning is not just how you're making sense of the world out there, the power of, thinking about politics, thinking about issues like climate change, thinking about AI. It's also really an inward journey. What are you continuing to learn about yourself? What are the wisdom that you earn from the experience? And how do you continue to treat yourself as somebody that continues to evolve, as opposed to somebody that has a level of predictability and stuckness?
Well, one thing that I try to do is to learn from people like you two. In other words, others are the source of my inspiration and my continuous learning. So I choose my friends and my colleagues because they can contribute to my learning over a long period of time. It's important that we learn together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this whole idea that you're raising about the introspection and the whole idea of what do I learn within myself by being able to be a continuous learner really depends heavily on how much I'm willing to reflect on my learning.
Yep.
So it seems to me like too often I see in classrooms when I'm there, or often even in these journals that I buy that sort of look and say, here's a way to help you, because I'm always interested. I'm a learner. I'm always interested in what other people are trying to do and how they're trying to help you. And one of the things I see is that there's lots of prompting that goes on. But the prompting very often is external still.
Yes.
Because it's asking me to look within myself, but it's telling me what to look for.
Yeah.
And so I'm very interested in how do I get so interested in what I'm learning? It's what you and I talked about, Allison, when we said it's about self-discovery. How motivated am I? How is my mental disposition for self-discovery, for actually remaining open to continuous learning, not about what's outside, but also about myself? That's very interesting.
And by the way, anybody that wants to join our party, please go ahead and drop a comment in the chat, whether you're tuning in on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Again, we'd love the interaction, whether it's an insight or a question of any of the three of us. Go ahead and contribute. So I think the interesting dynamic, Bena, as you started to clarify that, is the difference between remaining open to continuous learning and swapping out remaining open to continuous improvement. And I think that's one of the interesting dynamics. Oftentimes, people see those as interchangeable, but they're really not. So can we talk a little bit about what the difference is between continuous learning versus continuous improvement? Art, did you want to start with that?
Well, I think the improvement and the learning go hand in hand. In other words, if I'm trying to improve myself, I need to enter a process of learning to continue to improve. But all learning does not necessarily contribute to my improvement. In other words, I can learn what not to do. I can learn what works and what doesn't work. And of course, if I incorporate those, I might improve myself. But I don't know, maybe it's my age, but as I grow older, um, I have lost my interest in improving myself. Well, that's not true. I want to improve myself, but not in a lot of energy. I don't have it. So I want to continue learning. That's true, but I don't have a lot of energy to put into it. So I have to be selective. I can't improve at everything. I can improve at some things. And so I can improve in my writing. I can improve in my reading. I can improve in my friendships. I can improve in my hobbies, for example. But I have to be very selective. I know that improving and learning are two different things. Because learning, as I said earlier, is also learning what not to do. And so taking care of myself, I'm learning what not to do as well as what to do. So both are important.
You know, it's interesting, Art, because I mean, you're reflecting and you're saying that it's because of your age. I
Yes.
can also clarify, like, it's something like when I feel exhausted, you know, the idea of remaining open feels just way too much. Like, and I think it's not just around like your age. I think it's around your equilibrium, like your balance as you're moving through the world. And so the opportunity of trying to have people that buoy you is, I think, another interesting part. Like even having conversations like we did last week to gear up for this live talk continues to give me a level of breadth and perspective, you know, around not just the habit, but it helped sort of fill something from an introspection point of view.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like improvement always implies I'm aiming to be successful. That to me is the implication. And so when I think of improvement, I think because I want to be more successful. But that isn't really remaining open to continuous learning in the sense that I'm thinking of it right now. There is no question. There are times when I am motivated by a need for improvement. I see a problem. I'm metacognitive. I'm aware. I see that I'm not very good at something. Then when I see that, I want improvement. I'm after it. I'm motivated by it. So I realize that. But there are other times when it isn't what motivates me. What motivates me is actually just knowing a little bit more about how the mind works, being a little bit more aware of what constitutes balance for me. You're talking about balance.
Yeah.
What centers me? What puts me in the mode in which I'm open? How do I really find myself being open? It seems like that sort of very strong ability to be able to be aware of my body, aware of my movements, aware of myself. Those are all big, important, continuous learning activities for me. And I will say that I'm finding that it really is important to think about this because I don't think it's about age. I think with age, you just are motivated by different ideas about where you're going and what you're doing. When you feel like your lifespan is shorter rather than infinite, which is the way I felt as an adolescent, infinite, invulnerable, just going to happen. And now it's kind of like, well, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? What's going to happen in the next day or two? There's a humility about all of that that brings you to a sense of a different understanding about what it means to remain open, both to the external world and your internal world.
Well, we're starting to lean into the next topic of conversation, thinking about creating a culture that fosters remaining open to continuous learning. So we heard several times about the significance of humility. And again, humility can also come with age, but humility also is something that can actually be part of a culture in a classroom, a culture in a family, etc. Can you talk about a concrete example or two, whether Art or Bena wants to go first, of how do you build a
I'll give you
culture
some.
for humility?
Go, Art.
Well, just one. What I was thinking about when you were talking was about a lot of the stores and businesses that are no longer in existence because they were unable to adapt or disinterested in adapting. Do any of you remember Cress's department store, Cress's 5 and 10 cent store?
Oh,
You're all
yeah.
too young for that.
I
You
remember the
remember
5 and 10.
Newberry's,
Outdoors.
How about
I
some of
remember
our
Blockbusters.
some of our stores today? I just read in the paper where we have a chain out here called Big Lots, and it's closing stores. Well, they're not keeping up. There are other companies that are expanding. Walmart, Costco, Target, they're building stores, and here we have some stores that are closing down. Why is that? It's because I think one reason, not the only one, they're not keeping up with what's going on in the world in terms of pricing, in terms of innovation, in terms of what pleases the customers. So you have to take on a whole new attitude to remain in business. And that's true of the business world, it's true of learners of all kinds. We have to have that continual competency building and interest in improving ourselves in order to stay in business.
And Art, you're making a beautiful connection to thinking flexibly. I mean, I think that is a significant part of this. And we can talk about like what other habits that are really important as we're cultivating remaining open to continuous learning. I mean, one thing that is always capturing my attention is responding with wonderment and awe. I mean, I think if you're really trying to lean into remaining open to continuous learning, you have to have room or space to breathe. So it's not just the physical breath, which is a significant part of it, but the opportunity not to be so harried all of the time. Where if you're rushing from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, as I often do,
one Zoom
that's
after
right,
another.
one Zoom after another, like one flight after another, all of a sudden you start to feel like when you are settling down, that's really where the opportunity is to reflect, to cogitate, and to potentially have a space to
breathe.
And there's a level of generative thinking that potentially happens once you get over your exhaustion.
So I'm going to bring up another one because this is one that I find myself in sometimes, which is, I think another habit that's very much a part of this is finding humor. And one of the reasons is because I find within myself how humorous it is. So here's an example. I am often feeling like I don't have, because part of remaining open to continuous learning is also developing confidence within yourself that you can be a good learner. Well, I am a little shy of confident about technology. So I'm always worried about the idea that if I do this, I'm going to mess it up. And if I mess it up, who knows what this computer has its own life that I don't understand. And it could freeze, it could stop, it could go blank. I don't know what all. So I am working with someone who is a lot younger than I am. His name is Kuda. He happens to be your son, Allison.
Yes.
And he's just the most delightful, competent, caring individual. And he doesn't make me feel like I'm dumb ever. But I always think to myself, before I get in touch with him because I'm in a panic over something, I ask myself, well, what would Kuda do? What would he do if he had this situation? And I try to think like what he's told me he thinks like. And sometimes I'm pretty good at it. And at other times I say, well, I tried. I think I'll call him now. But it's kind of humorous to me to realize all the mental activity that goes on in just taking a chance, taking a risk, and being a continuous learner, and knowing it may take me longer. I may mess up. It may not be right. And I often think to myself that for me, it's humorous because I feel, what so? I won't do it. But then I picture that kid in a classroom who has those very same thoughts, the ones that say, should I try it? Maybe I shouldn't try it. I don't want to mess up. I don't want everybody to laugh at me. I don't want this. And so all of that, it seems to me, is about finding that space, as I said before, where you create enough trust and enough safety that you can feel like nobody is going to care whether you get it right or you don't get it right. I think they're going to care more if you just never try. I think then, as what Bill Summers said comes back to me, which is, it's not so bad not to learn. It's bad not to even want to learn.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue.
So as we continue the conversation, John Clark is joining us. So hello. And the statement that you're adding to the conversation is, I'm a qualified teacher and taught at a college, and you're always saying that you're going to be learning until the day you die. And I think that was sort of the conversation that Art started us off with. But I think the interesting dynamic around remaining open learning is the territory of what other habits are coming along with it. So Bena started leaning in. I started leaning into thinking flexibly and remaining wonderment and awe. So what habit or habits do you think are joining the party as part of this? So if you wanted to share that insight in the comments, whether you're commenting or joining us live on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, that is awesome. But let's move to the next piece of this, thinking about the importance of role models. So Art, my friend, when you think about the importance of role models, you have been a role model for so many folks around the world. And starting to think about when you're modeling, remaining open to continuous learning, what are the things that you pay attention to, whether you're chatting with a group of educators or you're engaging with your family?
Well, I think there are several things. I see myself as a continuous learner. Going back to my childhood, I can remember my father, who was a physician, and he'd come home and we'd sit down at the dinner table, and my brother and sister and I each had to report to him what we learned that was significant that day. And so I guess I grew up with a person who was very interested in continuous learning and remaining open and being a continuous learner. I learned it from my youth, but I also learned that from modeling, from other people modeling it with me, as I saw both my father and both my mother and my sisters and brothers learning continually, being students, valuing school, and teachers also who were in a continuous learning mode. They valued the fact that they were having professional development and sharing that with the class. They valued the books that they were reading and sharing some of their readings with the class. They asked more questions than giving answers. So they were curious. They were wanting to know. They were wanting to hear more about it instead of just agreeing with person, but so you say, tell me more. I want to know more about that. So that curiosity, I think, is very much a part of continuous learning, which is another one of the habits of mind, of course, is questioning and clarifying. I think we play a role with students and with children as parents and teachers that they're going to model and they're going to learn from us, not only the content, but also the processes of learning.
Mm.
I also think, and going back to some of the other habits of mind, that metacognition plays a very important part of this. It's a wonderful experience to realize that you don't know something. And you realize that, what does that mean? I want to know more about that. What questions do I have about that? What can I relate this to? What can I link it to that I already know? In other words, trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of our world is one of the biggest challenges of continuous learners. So having friends and having teachers that are curious and that stimulate us to continuous learn, very important.
So here's a fun little story that taught me something. And that is when our grandson was 3 years old, Joshua, when he was 3 years old, and our daughter, Jude, wanted him to be able to get into Bank Street because she wanted him to be able to be in that wonderful nursery school of Bank Street. And so he went for believe it or not, in New York City, you go for a test to get into these little 3-year-old classes. And so he went in, and it was a test. The teacher, the person who was doing the test, was kind of asking him questions, and she asked him a bunch of questions, and he apparently was fine. And then she asked him one question, and she came out and she told us afterwards, or told Jude afterwards, what he said. So she asked him a question, and he went, I don't know, but I could ask my mommy and I could get back to you. And the idea was he could not imagine somebody was asking him a question and she already knew the answer to it. And it's kind of struck me about how much schooling can be like that. Somebody who's asking you the question, but they already know the answer to that. So why are you asking me that? Ask me something I don't know.
Yeah.
Ask me something I can investigate. Ask me something that I can inquire about. So I often remember our little 3-year-old Josh being like very puzzled why anybody would be asking him a question if she already knew the answer to it anyway, but he'd get back to her.
It's fascinating, Bena. Based on that story, I'm also thinking about some of the work that you and I have done around social construction as an aspect of personalized learning. And one of the ways that we chat about social construction is seek out expertise and share your expertise with others. And I think it's an interesting dynamic in that it goes right back to the learning environment you're in. Are you in a space where you are a trusted member or participant? Or are you there to figure out answers or solutions to questions that already have been almost asked and answered? And so it's an interesting dynamic of thinking about in what ways, like going back to humility, because I think that has been a strong undercurrent in the conversation tonight. From a humility point of view, the importance of actually having children, having kiddos as role models. So can you talk a little bit about that, Bena, in terms of how we can continue to see that our kids have something truly powerful to teach us, or from even a peer-to-peer scenario of how to actually have role models that are not hierarchical, but more partnership?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hear it all the time that often teachers will say, oh, they listen to each other better than they listen to me. And I don't think that the teacher means they don't listen to me. I think she or he has a great deal of admiration and respect for the fact that through their exchange with one another, through their pursuit and through their interests, they are able to really encourage this remaining open to continuous learning. I've seen them dive in and search for something together with intensity and passion. And I'm not just talking about one of the video games. I mean, really something they're really curious about. They're trying to figure it out. And they become such good detectives of information. And what's really interesting when we talked about role models is the wonderfulness of a teacher who can say, you know, honestly, I really don't know much about that.
Yeah.
But I'd be curious. Let me know what you find out. I'm eager. I'll give you space in the classroom so you can share it with others. It's that understanding of a kind of mutual curiosity and exploration that really kind of can permeate the responsiveness of a classroom. So I find it interesting that the student voice, when we
Yes.
give it, is really one that opens the door to so many things we never knew. And I mean, right now, adolescents are living in a world of their own language, just as we did when we were adolescents. So what I used to call cool, they now call fire. So I've learned. For a while, when they said, that's really bad, I thought, what's bad about that? But then I found out, oh, they mean that's good. I mean, who knew? Anyway, I think the idea of moving into that space and understanding it and letting them have their way of developing their thinking around that space is so important.
Bena,
I'd like to
okay,
add this too, and that is knowledge and curiosity are not built in isolation.
Mm.
Rather, it is through the interaction with other people or other students. And so having kids talk in groups and learn from each other and test ideas on each other and share differences in their interpretation is a very important way. In other words, kids alone do not learn nearly as much as kids do in groups. And that's true for all of us, not just kids, of course. And so having group interactions in the classroom where kids have to come to consensus with their peers, where they have to come up with a plan of action, if they have to co-create something with a group, this is much more powerful than learning alone. And so that interaction that kids have with each other is a wonderful source. So have kids work together, solve problems together.
And John's echoing what you're saying right now, Art. He said, I think a good teacher should encourage a learner to explore the subject. And when you're starting
Yes.
to imagine, you know, John's comment, Art, what you just said, what Bena just said a few minutes ago, we have one more habit that's popping up to the party right now is questioning and posing problems. You know, I think on some level, remaining open to continuous learning is a journey. It's not designed to always have an end destination. Doesn't have to get tied up in a bow because the class period is over or the week is over. I think the opportunity of continuous learning means that you're walking away with some really important questions that you perhaps still don't know the answer to. There is a level of tolerance for ambiguity. There is an opportunity to actually see the world in its flaws and, you know, sometimes significant challenges, but you see it with an optimistic bent or view. The opportunity that you remaining open to continuous learning is really part of it is a hope for humanity. And I think it would be cool to sort of end on that conversation of thinking about continuous learning and that kind of hope-filled and optimism. So Bena, Art?
I certainly agree with that. I wish the world would continue to learn how to live in peace, how to love each other, how to know how to settle differences in peaceful ways, because what we see going on in the world right now takes a lot of learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really appreciating. I think when we're continuous learners, it means that we're always appreciating and respectful of other people, of other thinking, of other cultures, of the diverse wonderfulness of everybody. And I think that it just seems to me that that idea of optimism is based on the idea that what I learn isn't going to throw me so off balance that I won't be able to function or to accept other people, other ideas, other things. It's that not the fixed mindset, but the growth mindset, the willingness to be able to be open to growing my thinking in some ways, which does not mean that I need to agree with everybody. It does not mean I need to accept everything. It does not mean that all information is good information. It does mean that I'm more than willing to just pursue. It's a quest.
And in this polarized world that we're living in right now, I think remaining open means that there's a yet associated with it.
Yep.
The ing verb is more important than ever right now, is that I might have a particular opinion or point of view or steadfastness, but it's not so entrenched that I become brittle or closed off. And in this moment that we're in the world right now, I think that's a lovely way to end in terms of looking toward a hopeful and peaceful start to the holiday season. And Art, Bena, it's always such a joy to spend some time with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So tune in for next month where we will go after another habit. And again, if you're just joining the party a little bit late, we would love to have you join us live and in person at the Habits of Mind conference, which is going to be happening April 7th and 8th in Greece, New York. So go ahead and venture over to the Habits of Mind website and you'll get more information. It's a pleasure spending some time with you. Thank you.
Thank you.